It's a pleasure to introduce Dr. Mike O'Sullivan. Mike is a senior lecturer in engineering science at University of Auckland. He was a few years ahead of me at Stanford University, and so he started the touch rugby club and was the host for any All Blacks games while I was in California, so I've known Mike for a few years. He's also our theme leader for precision-driven health in the area of precise and timely healthcare. So he's got a real expertise in optimisation and things like that. So great to have you along, Mike. Thanks.
Cool. Thanks, Kevin. Thanks, everyone. So, did anyone go to ORSNZ, NZSA last week? Excellent. This will be new for all of you then. So, as Kevin said, I'm Mike O'Sullivan. I'm from the Department of Engineering Science in the University of Auckland. I'm going to talk today about our work in analytics, although I'm really more from an operations research background. I'm about understanding and improving health services, and I'm going to tangent a little bit at the end just to talk about services, but we'll see how we go. Feel free to jump in with questions anytime. Okay. So the way I think about how we use operations research and analytics together, and this is in all our application areas, so we work other places than just health, is essentially this flow chart, so engaging the stakeholders about the problem, getting access to the data, and I'm sure as a data wrangling organisation, or at least that's part of what you do, you understand the difficulty sometimes there, using that data to form some statistical models, maybe some predictive models, and then where we really work is in the decision models, building some decision models, running experiments, getting solutions, understanding what those solutions mean. So a lot of the time with my students I say you can't say X1 equals this, you have to explain to the user what X1 actually means, and then presenting those solutions back to the stakeholder. And obviously there's lots of feedback loops and iterations all the way through this process. So as I sort of said, I'm an operations research person, so ORUA, which is my research group, is we look to combine operations research and analytics. And I see operations research as really being this decision models and solving those decision models. And my perspective on analytics is it kind of comes in when the data is involved, so accessing it, visualizing it, understanding it, the statistical modeling. The predictive model part I think is a little bit in the middle of the two things, or maybe its own whole area. And then I think once you've got solutions to the decision models, you go back and start visualizing them so they're easy to understand. And then anyone who's working with real world people has to be able to engage with stakeholders and present back to stakeholders. So this is kind of how I think about we segment the operations research and analytics, and I think they're both key processes. And I would say, in my own opinion, or my own experience, the analytics side and even the predictive modelling side has been really a hot topic in the last few years. So originally it was everyone said, hey, you've got to get your data, so a lot of companies started gathering data, and then someone was like, okay, we've got all our data, now what? And then people started visualizing it, looking to understand it, maybe build statistical models of it. And where I think we're at now is kind of in this area here, where this is being done quite a lot, in this side of it as well, but probably the decision model stuff, which is actually a reasonably mature science, is starting to be used more and more because people have enough data to be able to drive these decision models, whereas probably 5 or 10 years ago the data to drive these models wasn't really there. And so as an operations research practitioner, that's made me very happy because we've almost got a bit of a renaissance now. Yeah.
Yeah. When do you know that you've got enough data?
There's two answers to that question. One, you never have enough data, and two, you always have enough data. And you have in one of the examples I'm going to talk about, it was really a small data as opposed to a big data problem, and actually we're quite flexible in our decision models. So sometimes we build complex models that require a lot of data. If there's a lot of data available, if there's not, then we just do something. Yeah. So the answer is it sort of depends on these two steps. Well, really this step. What do your stakeholders want to know, and have they got the data to understand that? And if they haven't, what can you tell them with the data they've got available? So, yeah. So never enough and always enough are probably the two answers to that question. And so in terms of the precision-driven health research partnership, the way I see that same process kind of working with the 4 themes, So predictive modelling is pretty easy to see. New data sources again comes in the analytics side of things. I think the statistical models of data is kind of bridges between the new data sources and predictive modelling. And the precise and timely healthcare, personally, I see that as almost most operations research, although any kind of decision modelling I think can work there. And it's a lot about once you know what you need, it's making sure that all gets to the right place at the right time. And then the empower patients sort of comes at the end. Once you've got your solution, you have to get some sort of buy-in from the patients, otherwise it's not going to work at all. So I think precision-driven health is reasonably well aligned with at least how I think about how analytics and operations research work together. So that's good. So who am I? I've said already, I'm from the Department of Engineering Science. As Kevin said, I'm a precise and timely healthcare theme leader. I've been invited to join Te Pūnaha Matatini, which is the complex systems core. I'm actually off tomorrow down to Hui in Wellington for that. I came to the University of Auckland doing, well, all of my degrees are really operations research, but the names of the departments changed quite a lot as I was going through. So I was in the same department at Stanford. Kevin knows all about this. I was in the same department at Stanford, but it changed its name twice while I was there. So I started off in the operations research department. I got my master's in the EESOR department. I got my PhD in management science and engineering, and I did the same thing all the way through. So I've got lots of great keywords in my CV, which is nice. I do research at the university, but also quite a lot of consulting in operations research, and I think it was more computational analytics, obviously for health, I wouldn't be here. We also look at making cloud computing work better. We do some water resources planning with a consulting company that consults to most of the water utilities in the UK. We've got some financial models we're actually getting also into construction planning. So, and just the last couple of days I was working on some optimization models for inductive power technology, so to get you driving electric cars along the roads. Yeah, so we do all kinds of things, and the models behind it, a lot of the technology or theory behind and the models behind it is similar across these areas, which means we can be quite broad. Okay, so that's a little bit about me and how I see the world. This is what I'm going to talk about today. We've got 3 case studies, one about patient transit, so just moving people around hospitals, one about cancer treatment, so this is about trying to get people from their referral to their first treatment, and one about healthcare initiatives. And again, this is going to be more a how do we evaluate services as opposed to health services particularly, but it came out of the Ministry of Social Development and Ministry of Health kind of, well, I want to say kind of working together, but it's almost like they didn't want to work together, and so we got in the middle and now they can work together, which has some interesting implications. So in terms of patient transit, this came out of 2 projects, one with Auckland City Hospital and one with North Shore Hospital. The patient transit process is pretty straightforward. Sure, I got rid of that animation. Anyway, transit request comes in, a dispatcher or the system assigns an orderly and sometimes a transit nurse if the patient needs a nurse with them to go and get the patient. They go to where the patient is, they pick them up, they travel with the patient, they drop them off, and that transit is complete. So again, a relatively straightforward process. So you think, well, what can you do? The answer is we can help. When we worked with Auckland DHB, they had about 50% of their transits were not arriving within an acceptable time window, and that was 15 minutes before their scheduled appointment to exactly at the scheduled appointment. So they had 50% of people arriving late. They did some lean process improvement, and they got up to only 25% arriving late, so 75% within the acceptable time window, and that was as much as they could squeeze out of their system using lean methods. And so they came to us and said, look, do we even have the right number of staff? And we want to be able to see how much more blood we can squeeze out of the stone before we have to then bite the bullet and pay for more orderlies or transit nurses. Okay. So how do we do this? So we start off with the analytics phase of things, where we have our transit requests here, and so this is data about where the request is moving from and to, when the appointment time was, when they sent the nurse and orderly, so when they dispatched the people to go pick the person up and so on. Using the transit requests, you can calculate these drop-off arrival times. So here's the window where you want the patient to arrive. Sometimes they arrive too early, and this is not a good thing because then there's no resource there to look after them. So they might be sitting in the waiting area for radiology, and there's no dedicated nursing staff to take care of them, or they arrive late, and then you have things like surgical teams or MRIs waiting around, very expensive resources waiting for patients just to show up. What we did from this is we simulated historical traces, so essentially simulated this in a hospital model. So we had nice 3D animation. I'll show you one of those shortly, of orderlies going to pick up patients and moving them around the hospital shortly. Here's the orderly base with our orderlies in here. They're heading off to do stuff. Each one of these red-green things is a location where patients can be picked up and dropped off to. And so this is simulating, again, this is North Shore Hospital, so orderlies going and picking up patients, moving around the hospital, dropping them off, so going to and from radiology, to and from surgery, moving between wards, etc. One thing Ian won't kick me out of the building for, this is all in Java. So it's using a Java simulation object called JAMSIM. We go and we pull all the floor plans in, and we put maps about where the orderly is allowed to move. And we're just in the process of working with Watermatter DHB to calibrate it using their data systems to try and get an accurate representation of the hospital for a couple of reasons. They have the same question. Do they need more staff? Do they need more orderlies? And the main question they have is they're about to get a big new building or two, and how many orderlies they're going to need to service that building. So that's a project which we just went and kicked that off yesterday.
Did you identify which movement is the most frequent? I mean, from service A to service B, is the one that is the most used or something like that?
It's usually radiology. Yeah, so usually to and from radiology the most frequent. Yeah, and there's we have done some work with the Auckland model about dispatch policies, and so one of the things that seems like a no-brainer but is not necessarily straightforward is often you'll take someone down to radiology, and then unless your system is kind of looking ahead, there may be someone who's about to come out of their appointment in a couple of minutes. So it's better for you, rather than racing off and trying to do something else, it's better for you to wait a couple of minutes and pick someone up and take them back to wherever they need to go to. And often that side of things, especially in automated systems, doesn't necessarily get well captured, and also how long that should be, how long you should wait around before it's not worth waiting around and should go to something else is an interesting question. And it may also depend on how many other requests there are, and so we're working on optimization systems around that. But yeah, so mostly radiology, definitely Auckland. We just get our hands on the data for this one, so yeah. Okay. So exactly what I was talking about. The next step, once we can understand what's happening with the orderlies using our simulation of the historical data, is we want to say, hey, could we do it better? And this all relates to this dispatch step. And so when a transit comes in, you now know, here's all the transits that I've got requests for, here's the transits my orderlies are currently doing, who should do which transit, and we basically solve an optimization model to do that. The curly part, the complex part, is if the transit needs a nurse, then they can affect the orderly can't just move freely. So in this example, if orderly 1 is late to pick up 2, and so the nurse has to wait for them, then the nurse may be delayed, they may be late for pick up 7, so then orderly 2 gets delayed. And so this kind of linking of the nurses to different orderlies made this a bit tricky, and it also meant that the standard optimization algorithms for vehicle routing, this is basically a vehicle routing problem, don't work straight out of the box. So we came up with a vehicle routing model with some tricks to, which essentially solves the ordinalies and then sees can we get nurses in there, and then adjust it if we need to, and that replaced, well, in our experiments, that replaced the nearest possible staff heuristic, which mimicked how they dispatched currently. What we found was we ran this optimal dispatch model within the simulation. We put a time limit on it because obviously you can't wait half an hour to get a solution for the next 5 minutes. And every time a transit request is made or a patient is dropped off, so either when a new request comes in or an orderly or transit nurse become free, we'll solve this model. We had 15 different days with 3 different staff levels, 20 simulation replications, etc., etc. So we ran quite a few different experiments. In each of the experiments you had about 400 optimal dispatch calls per day, and you'd be looking to plan for 15 jobs or 15 transits, and up to 39 jobs. And these ones, once you start getting a high number of jobs, The complexity, the combinatorial complexity means it takes a little while to solve, but we mostly could get an optimal solution. So even with the time limit, we mostly would solve optimality. And what we found was we could reduce the total late time over the day across all these and all late transits by usually about 21% and as much as almost 50%. So using optimal dispatch does have some, looks like it's a promising approach to automating the dispatch and maybe improving the way they dispatch all these in practice. So how does this then come back into what we did at Auckland City Hospital, North Shore Hospital? This is the Auckland City Hospital model. This is the new building. This is the old tower. At the moment, we're calibrating that with the data. As I said before, anyone who's dealt with data wrangling knows that when you get patchy data, it makes everything a bit hard, and so that the data around the orderly movements at Auckland is not superb, and so we're working on cleaning that up. And as I said, we're engaging with WHB to utilise the model, and we just started that yesterday. So what we want to do is get those models as accurate as possible for what they currently do, and then see what would be the benefit of using an optimal dispatch. Any questions so far? Cool. Okay. So sort of unintended side effect that was really nice from a research perspective about this is if you use traditional queue models for discrete event simulation and you then put an optimizer inside it, it gets really tricky because you effectively you no longer have queues. You have a decision model that says, hey, I want you to do this and then this and then this, but then next time I want you to do this and then this and then this. And so we found trying to put our optimal dispatch algorithm within a queuing model was really difficult, so it looked really straightforward, and then you get this big mess of queues to try and make your optimal dispatch decisions work. And really there is no patient queuing. We're just assigning patients orders to one another. So we actually came up with a new simulation paradigm, which, don't blame me for the name, this was my postdoc from Austria, hierarchical control conceptual modelling. And the long story short is basically we get rid of queues. Any control of entities flowing through the model is done explicitly. So you say, hey, when an orderly becomes free, then I'm going to get, in order to control what they do next, I'm going to get you to solve this optimization model, and whatever solution comes from that, that's what I'm going to do, rather than saying they go into this queue and wait for their turn. And we've actually used the HCCM framework in a few different places. It's great if people are multitasking or roles are changing within your simulation. So this is an example of the cytology lab just down there in Lab Plus. This is not actually their layout. These are a whole bunch of different sort of logical areas where they do tasks, and they do a lot of different things and struggle to load balance. And so we used this framework to optimize the allocation of tasks to patients, and that was actually done with funding by Orion Health. Partly, yeah, for the last 2 years of a 3-year PhD. So our student employer had already started working on this and then was funded by Orion Health in Callahan. We've just started using this in construction, and that's quite important, this idea of the role changing, because for instance a trucker initially is queuing up to wait for an excavator to then load it up, and then it becomes a transporter and it gets to go through, and then it becomes a queue when it drops off. So trucks in particular change their roles quite a lot. How you do that with a traditional queue-based model is you sort of have a truck resource that fails and create an entity that then queues up. When the entity gets through the queue, it then disappears and the truck resource is then enabled. And so what we found is there's quite a lot of workarounds for these traditional discrete event simulation models for both health and construction, and so we came up with what we think is a better way, and we're using it quite a bit now. We had 2 students use it for looking at ward numbers at Auckland City Hospital and looking at flow through an ED at mid-central DHB, which is Palmerston North Hospital. So that's the first operational level decisions that we do, and I just thought I'd show you, this is quite an old project which is about advocates, so health and disability advocates travelling around the South Island. And so here, this is everyone travelling around Christchurch that's zoomed in. This is people from Dunedin, but also Invercargill. And what's interesting here is actually it's better for the Dunedin advocate to sneak into the Invercargill area to do a trip, or vice versa, So what we found is around the fringes with our optimisation algorithm, we could save both advocates a lot of time by sort of sharing around the edges of what we're doing. So this is linking Google Maps and optimisation model, which fortunately was a traditional vehicle routing problem, so it wasn't as tricky as the patient transit model. Here's the last operational one I'm going to look at before we move on to technical level decisions. This is general medicine rostering at Waitakere Hospital. So this is an example of a cyclic roster. So we have 6 registrars. Registrar 1 does this in week 1, Registrar 2 does this in week 1, Registrar 3 does this in week 1. Then on week 2, Registrar 1 does this one, Registrar 2 does this one, and so on. So they cycle through the roster. That makes sure that the roster is fair and equitable. But depending on when they're doing these A shifts, which are admitting shifts, that depends on how many patients they have to look after in the post-acute and then later on. And so depending how you set your roster up, you'll get this idea of workload of each of the teams. And what we want to do is make sure the disparity between workloads wasn't too bad, so we sort of want to squeeze it like this. And so, for instance, blue is allowed to have a peak as long as their peak above sort of yellow or green is not too large. And so we solved an optimization model to create this roster and look to squeeze the workload, and we actually used patient admission and discharge information to build this chart up. And we were one of the first people in the world to look at actually putting the actual data through and linking it to the optimization, the rostering model, instead of just aggregating it and having you have this many patients at this hour. So we didn't track patients individually, but we tracked kind of cohorts of patients from when they came in as they travelled through the system to build this model. And the main reason for this is they're moving to our ADCU, I think they call it ADU now, scheme where this black one is short stay patients and admissions of patients, which is similar to the APU over here at Auckland Hospital. And they've now put the ADCU in at Waitakere, and I think they already have it at North Shore. Oh, one thing I should say about this project, the clinical director said it was one of the easiest implementations of a roster they ever had, which is very pleasing. And the operations manager said that she'd never seen a roster like it, and she'd been working in the area for 20 years. So we gave them a roster they wouldn't have thought of by themselves, and it actually was really easy for them to put into place. So that was really, really great. Okay. Any questions before I change tack a little bit?
So are they using that as a sort of an online tool now or is it done every now? I mean, is it
they change the roster about every 6 months or so, and so yeah. So Auckland, we did our first roster for them 2010-11, and they came back to us this year to ask us if we'd look at it again. We're a little bit in competition with North, who sort of do the planning for Northland, Auckland, Waitemata. We compared our rosters to theirs, and we beat them hands down, but I think they're free, so I think Auckland decided they'd just go with North this time around. But yeah, so I think as a tool, it doesn't need to be a fast online tool, but I suppose our thoughts about it is this is something you could use across every single department in the hospital, for instance, and maybe even link it up for departments that are sharing resources. So as long as you're not solving everything all at once, it should work fine. Yeah, but yeah, no, it's certainly not online, not something you do online. Yeah. Any other questions? Cool. Okay. So the next project I want to talk about is one we did with Waitemata DHB around faster cancer treatment. So there's a government target that says 90% of priority 1, so serious patients, should spend less than 62 days from when they're first referred to the DHB until they receive their first treatment. The difficulty in understanding how to make this happen if it's not happening is that the processes are quite complex, and as we found out pretty quickly, there's no single person in the DHB who knows exactly what happens all the way through the process. So we thought we'll put our analytics hats on and we'll go in and we'll look at their data, we'll understand what's going on, and we can see if we can help them to improve how this all works. That's the process map. This is the breast cancer cancer treatment pathway. So this is where they get referred in, and they go through lots of different steps. This is sort of triage and imaging. Oh, this is imaging here. Lots of things about deciding to treat. These orange things are what they call transcription pathways, which are incredibly inefficient, and I won't talk about them right now because they make me upset. And then they go down, and this is when they get their first treatment. This is not when they finish treatment, this is their first treatment they receive. So we got this process map by a whole bunch of people at Automatic DHB around breast cancer sat together, talked about what they did, wrote it all down on big pieces of paper, gave us about 16 of those. The same postdoc Nick, who you can blame for that long name, he put them into, he organised them, and then we put them into electronic flowchart, and we took them into show this steering group. We had 5 A3 pages. We printed at 80% size. We had 5 A3 pages. You basically put it from the ceiling to the floor and said, "Have a look, is this accurate?" And they were all going, "Oh, do we really do that there? Yeah, okay." And then someone else would be, "Oh, is that?" Yeah, and they agreed this was it. But none of them had ever seen it laid out like this before. So that was useful. And then we made the mistake of saying to them, "So where do you have data?" All these green points sort of scattered somewhat randomly through it are places where they have data. So they really did not have much data on each of these individual steps at all. So we simplified it down to two, we simplified it down. There's a few key steps: when they're referred, when they get imaging, when a diagnosis is made, when their first specialist appointment happens, when they decide what the treatment plan is going to be, and then when they get their first treatment. So there's episode end date. Sometimes people leave because it's not appropriate for them to have this type of treatment, but we're interested in people who get down to here. So we could simplify that enormous complex flowchart into these steps. So referral, authorisation date, which means they've been triaged, they're ready to go, radiology, so imaging, diagnosis, first specialist opinion, decision to treat, and then they get treatment. And it had some indicators around this pathway. So it's obviously 62 days from start to finish. They said less than equal to 31 days for this last bit, from decision to treat until treatment, and less than equal to 14 days from referral to FSA. So we looked at that and we said, well, there's an obvious gap here, you might need to worry about what's happening there as well. So one of our first suggestions was, let's look at what's happening there. So we created a new indicator where we asked them about it, and they said 3 weeks is a reasonable time frame. So we said, well, let's see if we can get it done within 21 days. So now we have these indicators about what's happening in the whole pathway, but also what's happening in these smaller pieces of the pathway. And so the question is, so how do we solve things? In other words, what's causing indicator 1 to breach? So what's causing indicator 1 to be greater than 62? Anecdotally, they said, hey, if they get to the FSA on time, no problem. So as long as you get that within that 14 days, it's all good. The main issue with that is that they're usually breaking that one. And so they were a bit worried about, do they really need to make sure this works, because it could be a reasonably expensive fix. So we basically went and said, can we see what would happen if you did change the system? And as I said before, this is a small data problem, and that's because we had 74 patients, so records of 74 patients. So we're looking at 74 patients moving through the system. So the first thing we did was we plotted them, and it seems like here, so this is the indicator 2, the 14-day one. So if you get under 14 days, this is indicator 1, 62-day ones. So this one seems to bear out what they're saying. As long as you get in within 14 days, you don't breach here. Whereas the indicator 3, the 31 days, it was less clear. So this seemed like maybe where they should invest in resources, and we want to see if we could look a bit deeper into that. So the first thing we did is we looked at these steps, and we looked at the data, and we said, is the delay or the duration of each one of these steps correlated? And it turned out they weren't, and that was good news, because what it meant is we could then simulate each one of these steps individually and just glue them together. So we could then make a synthetic trace of patients, and so we generated 1,000 different patient traces, and we could use that to evaluate if we did any changes to each one of these steps. So this is the map for the breast cancer pathway, and this is from, so this 0 days, 1st of July 2013. This is when they started the system, and each time there's a diagonal upwards movement, there's some delay before they get to the next step. And you can see the green ones are everyone that's in compliance, and the red ones everyone that's not in compliance. And if we squeeze that all down to everyone starting at the same day, you can get an idea of where there's problems. So everywhere we see lots of red upslopes, particularly sort of around this area, it looks like there's an issue. Here's indicator 2, so you can see everyone who made indicator 2 here look like they're pretty good. So that also is bearing out the idea of, hey, indicator 2, this 14 days might be a good place to expend energy and resources. So then using that, we ran a simulation. This is how the pathway is currently working. So this is an estimate of the 90th percentile with a confidence interval around it. So we are 95% confident the current 90th percentile is between 86 and 64 days, with a point estimate of 74 more or less days. So then we said, let's take the data we're doing and let's truncate anything between referral and FSA day to be at most 14. So if it's less than 14, we'd use the actual data. If it's more than 14, we'd truncate it to 14. That gives us this plot here. And as you can see, it almost fixes it, but not quite. So they've got to expend quite a lot of effort in this first part of the process, the FSA part of the process, and they still wouldn't meet their target. Okay. And so this table here shows all the different things we tried. So the indicator 2 fixed again, they won't quite meet their target. And so we tried a bunch of different things. So this is if they did the 31 days, so they made the last step from decision to treat until first treatment at most 31 days. Again, that doesn't fix it. But if you fix the 21 and the 31 day together, you will meet your target. Okay, so that's this one here. So make sure that everyone gets from decision to treat to treatment within 31 days and gets from first specialist appointment to decision to treat within 21 days. Okay. And what we found was they can't just focus on one particular piece of the path, they've got to get 2 out of 3. And so you can see here, everywhere there's 2 yeses, they actually are in compliance, these 3. And then if they fix everything, everything's good. Okay? No problem, right? We have no idea how they'd fix things, but we just said, hey, if you comply with the indicators, this is what the results are going to be. And so that gives us some idea about where they would want to target their resources. We did this for some other cancer streams, upper gastrointestinal, colorectal and gynecological cancer. Those ones are a little bit trickier because the steps happen in different orders, but we gave them similar analysis for those cancer pathways as well. And they are a lot less compliant than the breast stream. So the outcome of the evaluation was that we said don't just focus on indicator 2, you need to look at other parts of your pathway. In parallel to this 21-day FSA to DTT that we introduced, some clinicians at Waitemata suggested they should do 38 days from referral to decision to treat. So if you add our 14 days for indicator 2 and 21 days for indicator 4, we get 35 days from referral to decision to treat. So that was really nice. It meant that our analytics, sort of data-driven analysis, almost matched what clinical expertise said was a good thing to aim for. So that was quite a nice validation that we were looking kind of in the right area. Waitemata DHB subsequently to our first analysis improved the breast cancer pathway, and now what it looked like from in 2014 was this, so you can see a lot less red. And I think they even said that this one here, which looks really bad, was actually a patient going and talking to their whānau about the treatment. So this was, they say this was patient driven, not treatment process driven. Okay. Yeah.
So why would you have a whole lot of discrete targets rather than just a rolling, like if you're at stage 1, you need to be there within, you've got 51 days to go, then you've got 48 days to go. You kind of, it's almost like you should have just a threshold to the stage, and it should be accelerated if you're behind schedule rather than having all these dimensions.
Yeah, absolutely, and that was sort of one of the things we said. We said just put a clock on your patients, so you know that if they were delayed through the FSA, then you have to do things faster from here on in. And the experience from this is that, and my sister's an endocrinologist over on the shore, and she told me, and the feedback we got from other people is if you have a good booking clerk, they'll do that. But you don't want to rely on having really experienced booking clerks all the way through the process, because then if one of them retires, then the whole process kind of gets screwed up. So, yeah, and it tends to be that the targets they do, the government target is kind of just by this many patients by this time, and so we looked. I'm not going to talk about it here, but we also looked into their booking processes. So one of them, they had one session a day, and so if you missed that session, you were automatically kind of waiting, a week plus. And so we said, hey, if you split them to do half days, so they had one day on Wednesday. We said if you split them to do half days, Tuesday and Thursday, then if someone misses Tuesday, they might make Thursday, so they're not going to end up waiting so long. So we did a little bit of exploration around how they would do stuff, but to be honest, they were happy with. One of the data analysts over there said this is the best visualization of the data she's ever seen. So they were quite happy with this level of sophistication. Yeah, so I think our recommendations were, you know, if you're going to use indicators, these are the targets you should aim for, but you also put a clock on people. But this is where you guys come in, right? They need to share their data along the pathway, so the various systems need to be integrated, so they can all have a look at what that clock is. You know, and that's one of the issues there. I think their systems. I think particularly Concerto and IPM, so the imaging one and the patient management one weren't playing that nice at the time. That may be fixed now. So the last thing I'm going to talk about, like I said, I'm going a little bit on a tangent. This is not really a health delivery service. This is actually talking about understanding and improving the delivery of services in general. This is work that we're doing for the Ministry of Social Development, but across different ministries, or different government sectors. And so it's under the name Oranga Mahi. And I'm just going to, this is sort of the official press release version of things, so I'm just going to highlight a few things. One is it's about providing services that are tailored to people's needs, so I think that sort of fits in quite nicely with Orion's view of individualised medicine. And it's a partnership between the Ministry of Social Development, the District Health Board, so we've got Northland, Waitemata, Waikato and Canterbury DHBs, and the University of Auckland, and we're doing the analysis side of things. And also running some of the randomised controlled trials and so on. The objectives are that we sort of get, this is one of my drums I always beat, is getting the right resources to the right person at the right time, and also to understand from these projects how we can evaluate future projects about if someone has a great idea, can we utilise data to see what's the effect of that great idea? So is it going to be worth doing a trial of that idea, or do the numbers just not make sense right away? And I think, you know, people do that across agencies, not so much, and you need a lot of data from a lot of different places to be able to do this for people in terms of their overall sort of cost to government, which in some ways related to their life outcomes. There may be some points where I have to be a bit intentionally vague on this, because some stuff I'm allowed to talk about, some stuff not so much. So this is all done within the integrated data infrastructure. Put your hand up if you've heard of that. Okay, cool. So the integrated data infrastructure is where there's a whole bunch of government data, and it's all linked. So for instance, I can go and look up someone, I won't know who they are, but I can look and see their NMDS records, so their National Minimum Data Set record, so what they were in hospital for, ACC, so what ACC claims did they make, MSD, were they on a benefit, were they not. Housing is even in there, but that's a bit tricky because it's done by housing instead of people. So there's this big repository of linked data sets, and what we want to be able to do is use these linked data sets to see if we can evaluate the impact of an initiative for all different organisations, and then those different organisations who are realising the value of that initiative may then contribute some funds to make sure that initiative happens, even if it's not in their sector. And so the initiatives look at all health initiatives, are mostly around mental health, so there's cognitive behaviour therapy in Waikato for people who have mild mental health issues, which in a lot of cases is addiction. There's a training program for people with serious mental health in Waitemata. There's an initiative around helping people who've had strokes, younger people who have strokes, recover also in Waitemata. So these are all health initiatives, but actually the benefits are across other sectors, so the Ministry of Health shouldn't have to cover the total cost of these things. So this is sort of Bill English's cross-sector investment drive, and our part of it is to figure out, well, who's getting the benefit and what's the total benefit, and in some ways a little bit, well, you're getting that much benefit from it, so you should contribute to the cost of this program. So effectively, this is sort of what I said, we take an individual's contextual and outcome data, we stitch it together, and then we say, hey, which people have different outcomes, and it's particularly on which people have outcomes that we don't think are good. So an example might be that people whose contextual information, in other words, they work less than 15 hours per day, have more days in hospital, and that might be because they go to hospital more because they can't afford to go to their GP, so they use the hospital as their primary GP, but they cost ACC less because they're working less, so they have less accidents at work, so ACC costs are lower. So depending on your context, that will affect your outcome. And so what we want to understand the value is we have some initiative that has a target cohort in mind, so it might be people who in part-time work, so less than 30 hours per week. We then partition that cohort by context, so in this case I've just done how much they work per week, so people maybe work 0 to 5 hours or 10 to 15 hours all the way up to 30, and then we measure sort of counts and outcomes for each partition. So with 0 to 5 hours, maybe there's 1,000 people in this partition, and they average 4 days per year in hospital, and if you're working more, I was going to say the research, but the people involved in this tell me that you tend to be healthier, and so there may be more people working 10 to 15 hours and only averaging 3.75 days per year in hospital. So what we'd like to do is, if someone comes up with an initiative, then that's going to change people's context. So we may be helping these people either making them well so they can work more, or helping them gain skills that mean they can work more, and so we're going to be moving people from the 0 to 5 hours bucket into this 10 to 15 hours bucket. And if we have an initiative that moves around about 300 people, then these outcomes are going to look different. So we're only going to have 700 people with 4 days per year in hospital and 5,300 people with 3.75 days per year in hospital. So we're going to save 75 hospital days per year, which is going to be, given the average cost of a day in hospital to government of about $1,800, is going to be worth about $139,000 per year. Okay. And then this is going to go on year after year after year. So this is not just a one-off for the next year. That also may affect their sort of total cost or outcomes, going forward. And we've actually done costing for entire lifetime using this data. And this, where I got the $1,800, we can have a spirited debate about that, but it was from 2014 patient costing data across 11 DHBs. So then this now gives you an idea of the value of this initiative in terms of improving people's outcomes. And the nice thing is you don't have to know about any particular person, because this all happens inside the integrated data infrastructure. So they do all the linking of the data, they give us access, we run SQL and SAS against the data, we pull it out in nice aggregated tables, so no one's individual information is compromised, yet we use it to help evaluate the effect on individuals, which I think is really cool. Any questions?
How do you deal with correlation versus causation on this one? So you could very well be that those who currently are 0 to 5 hours have more time in hospital, but by shifting them into more work, they don't have less time in hospital. It's just something else about the characteristics. Like, is there any way that we use the IDI to track that it actually does start making a difference, or other systems?
Yeah, so that's the idea of, that's where Matthew Parsons is using this whole thing. That's where they're a randomised controlled trial and that sort of thing. So this kind of gives you a ballpark idea of what the value of the initiative is, and that lets the governance board decide, are we going to go ahead with that initiative? Then they do a trial, and then they get what actually happens, and then we can hopefully be able to pull that back in. So you can ad hoc upload data, so we could pull data sets in, as long as they're reasonably big, as long as it's sort of more than 20 people, you can link it back into the IDI and see what was the actual effect. So that's kind of a next step down the line. So it's almost saying, is it worth going to a pilot? If it's worth going to a pilot, if we think it might be worthwhile, then we'll go to a pilot, and then we use the pilot to accurately assess its actual value. So this is kind of, if someone has a good idea, this is a way of sort of saying, well, how much is that good idea worth? So can we fund it? Any other questions? Yeah.
Does it account for people who have multiple part-time jobs? Or do they then get classified as full-time workers?
It doesn't at this point. So this is kind of an example, but at this point we do it off wages. So it's reasonably coarse partitioning, but yeah, it's total wages. So we don't really worry who you work for. It's just how much your total wages are, and then we, because we don't actually get to see the hours you work, we estimate that by saying, well, if you're at minimum wage, this is how many hours you work, and so yeah. So it's usually probably more about income level as opposed to actual hours in the analysis we do.
I assume you're not using only one parameters. You may use the age of the people.
Oh yeah, age.
Gender.
We do have gender, we haven't really found an effect for gender. Mostly what we're using at the moment is if you are identified by, as in the target cohort, so for example with a stroke, if you've had a stroke in the previous 2 years, then at this date and time you would be eligible to go onto a program. If you're between 18 and 55, then you'd be eligible to go into this initiative where they'd work with you to help you get back to work. And then a year after that, if you're in a job, then we look at your outcomes, and if you weren't in a job, we look at your outcomes, and you can really see there's quite a difference in the two costs between those two cohorts. And then the initiative is about moving people from not working, and that's in that case it's not working at all, so 0 wages, to some work, and even that very small any work seems to have a better health outcomes for these people. And there's some people who have, and we're working now on adding in stroke severity data. So this relates to your question, Kevin. We've got some data from Wairau actually, which has the severity of stroke for various people, and we're actually looking to partition on that severity of stroke. So there's all kinds of ways you can partition here, and that's really clinical guidance that tells us what should we be looking for. And also what the initiative is trying to achieve. So the initiative should be moving people amongst their context to try and give them better outcomes. So we just need to make sure we partition the context so that we can actually see some movement. Yeah.
When I look at this framework, it really looks like what we try to achieve with machine learning. We partition a set of data, we analyze the outcome, we train the machine learning, and then we use it.
We're doing regression models of this. Well, we can't because the IDI went down because of the earthquake. It's back up on Monday apparently. I think we can talk about that later. So that's the 3 case studies I want to talk about. Here's the kind of things we use. So all the ones in red cost money, all the ones in green don't. We do all kinds of stuff from sort of front end visualization, etc., to getting it into optimization engines, to then solving the optimization engines, and so on. This always looks like quite a long list to me, but I think most of our students would have almost all of that, maybe not so much. The SAS I had to kind of learn from Google in the IDI, which is quite challenging. It's a very interesting and slightly wonderful language. So then, what was easy, what was hard? All this work I do, it's really easy to get motivated when you're helping people who are keeping us well. So it's very positive goals. I work with great people. The problems are hard to solve, so that makes them interesting. What's been tough is data is always tough, and I'm sure most people in this room have had to deal with data that's either low quality or not very much. Implementation, so getting a successful research prototype up and running is relatively straightforward. Then getting someone to use it is relatively difficult, and we've had some success here, which has been very pleasing, like the Waitaki Hospital rosters. And because they're interesting hard problems to solve, they're hard problems to solve. And so actually getting solutions can be quite challenging, and sometimes you beat your head against the problem for quite a while before you get the solution out. And these are all the people I work with, the main researchers, clinicians, and lots of students. Thank you very much.